The lighthouse hummed through the orange glow of a dying star. Recycled metal and cold coffee hung in the air on the command deck. Captain Elara Nys stood at the central console, frowning at the holographic map rotating slowly before her. A long, thin nebula curled at the edge of the chart, its trace barely visible. She tapped her thumb against her hip. Behind her, the corridor hatch hissed open. Dr. Ishmael Brent stepped through, a datapad clutched in both hands. His spectacles caught the orange light from the viewport. He looked like a man carrying something fragile. "Captain, we have a priority signal from Probe 9, Ishmael reported. Elara did not turn. She snapped, "Report." It detected an anomaly, gravitational, in the Ashfall Nebula. Ishmael crossed to the holographic map and swiped his datapad. A new marker appeared on the display, pulsing red. The signature does not match any known stellar phenomena. Myra Saul grunted from her secondary station. She chewed on a piece of synth gum, her eyes fixed on her own screen. One hand reached up to touch the grease stain on her cheek. "The Ashfall Nebula is empty. No stars, no planets, just dust and radiation," she said. "The probe agrees with you," Ishmael replied. "That is why it flagged the signal." Elara studied the marker. A gravitational anomaly where nothing should be. That was not a mistake. It was a door. "Set a new course," she ordered. "Myra, input coordinates for the Ashfall Nebula." Myra stopped chewing. "Captain, we are running on reserve fuel as it is. A detour through that nebula costs us 3 days. 3 days of burn. We get there and find nothing. We are limping home on fumes." Elara turned to face her. "We get there and find something. We are not limping anywhere. Input the coordinates." Myra held her gaze for a moment. Then she shrugged and turned back to her console. Her fingers moved across the interface. The deck vibrated beneath them as the lighthouse changed heading. Ishmael pulled up the probe data on the main screen. Numbers and spectral lines scrolled past. "The density profile is wrong," he said. "There is mass here, a lot of it, but the nebula has no stellar core, no accretion disk, no event horizon." He paused. "This is not a natural formation." Elara walked toward the viewport. The orange star fell away behind them as the lighthouse angled toward the nebula. Ahead, the dust cloud glowed faintly, lit from within by radiation she could not see. "How long?" she asked. 31 minutes to nebula entry," Myra answered. Elara watched the dust grow larger on the screen. She did not sit down. 31 minutes passed in silence. The lighthouse entered the Ashfall Nebula. Outside the viewport, the orange light died. Everything turned gray and thick. Dust particles streaked past the hull, leaving tiny scratches in the outer coating. The ship groaned. The sound was low and constant, like something breathing against the metal. Elara gripped the edge of the console. "Sensors, report." Myra worked her controls. "Visibility is 0. Radiation is within acceptable limits. Gravity gradient is abnormal, steep. We are being pulled off course." "Compensate," Elara commanded. "I am compensating, but there is nothing to lock onto. The pull is coming from somewhere ahead, but there is no source on any sensor." Ishmael leaned forward, his eyes wide behind his spectacles. "Can you narrow the vector?" Myra did not answer. She stared at her readout. "Captain, I have a pocket of stable space. 200 kilometers ahead. It should not exist." Elara felt her pulse quicken. "Put it on the main screen." The viewport flickered. Static filled the display. Then the gray dust parted and something emerged. "A station." It hung in the void. The station was dark and scarred. Crystalline panels formed its surface, arranged in interlocking patterns that caught the faint nebula glow and refracted it into pale blue lines. The structure was massive. It was also dead. No lights, no movement, just cold geometry and silence. Elara stared at it. "Myra energy signature." "Faint," Myra said, "but present. Something inside is still drawing power, not a lot. Maybe a backup system, maybe a beacon." Ishmael stepped closer to the viewport. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The panel arrangement, the crystalline structure, I have seen this pattern before." Elara turned to him. "Where?" "Artifacts, fragments, from the Illith excavation sites." Ishmael swallowed. The Illith kept records of species that existed before they rose to power. He paused. "One of those species built using crystalline architecture. They called them the Kethran. They vanished. No extinction event, no recorded war. They simply stopped existing 20,000 years before humanity reached the stars." He looked at Elara. His voice wavered. "This is older than anything we have ever found." Elara felt the weight of that statement settle in her chest. 20,000 years, a species gone before humans learned to write. And their station was still here, still drawing power. "Slow approach," Elara ordered. "I want a full structural scan before we get within 2 kilometers." The lighthouse crept forward. The crystal station grew larger on the screen. Its surface was pitted and scarred by micrometeorite impacts, but the panels themselves held. No cracks, no collapse. The thing was built to endure. Myra spoke without looking up. "Captain, the energy signature just changed." "Changed how?" "It spiked 10% increase and—" She paused. One of the crystal nodes on the outer hull just lit up. Elara looked at the viewport. A single point of light glowed on the station's surface. It pulsed, softly, rhythmically. Ishmael pointed at his data pad. "That pulse frequency, it matches our communication array." The command deck went silent. Elara stared at that single, steady pulse. Something inside the station was awake. Something had heard them coming. She turned to Myra. "Hail it." Myra blinked. "We do not know what protocol." "Hail it standard first contact frequency. If it wants to talk, let it talk." Myra opened a channel. The pulse on the station's surface did not change, but the faint blue glow from the crystal panels began to spread. Ishmael whispered, "It is activating." Elara looked at the station through the viewport. Light crept across its surface like a slow wave breaking over stone. The thing had been dead for longer than human civilization existed, and now, because they had found it, it was waking up. She did not know if that was good. "Myra," Elara said, "bring us to docking range, slow and steady. Do not accelerate without my order." "Understood, Captain. Docking range in 9 minutes." Elara kept her eyes on the light. The light kept pulsing. The airlock connected with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Ishmael Brent stepped through first, his handheld lamp cutting a sharp cone of white light into the darkness beyond. The cold hit him through the soles of his boots, a deep chill that radiated up through the deck plates. The air tasted metallic, ozone and dust that had not moved in 10,000 years. He played the beam across the walls. Crystalline panels lined the corridor, each one faceted and dark. Etched into their surfaces were symbols, tight, angular, patterns that did not resolve into any script he knew. Behind him, Elara's footsteps were soft but deliberate. He heard the click of her sidearm being drawn from its magnetic holster. Myra's heavier tread came last, the diagnostic scanner in her hands emitting a low, steady hum. Ishmael stopped at the first panel. He pressed his gloved fingers to the etched surface. The symbols were not carved. They were grown. The crystal had formed around them, each line a microscopic variation in the lattice structure. "I don't recognize this," he said. His voice sounded small in the dead silence. Elara moved past him, scanning the corridor. "Keep moving. We need to find the core." They pressed deeper. The corridor opened into a wider chamber shaped like a flattened dome. The walls here were covered in the same crystalline panels, but these were larger, taller than a human. They rose in concentric rings toward a ceiling lost in darkness. A panel flickered. Ishmael froze, the light in his hand shook as he adjusted his grip. The panel nearest them pulsed once, soft blue-white. Then again, a hologram bloomed from its surface, projected into the empty air. It showed a map, a web of nodes connected by threads of light spreading outward from a single central point. The station. But the map was wrong. The station was larger than they had predicted. Much larger. The web extended into spaces the lighthouse sensors had not detected. Ishmael's breath caught. "This is the full structure," he said. "We only saw the outer shell." Myra stepped around him, her scanner aimed at the hologram. She frowned at the readout. "The energy signature is faint, but it's coherent. Something is still drawing power down here, something in the center." She pointed across the chamber. There was an opening in the far wall, a passage that sloped downward. Ishmael led the way, his lamp illuminating a corridor that narrowed as they descended. The panels here were different, darker. Their surfaces were smooth, unmarked by symbols, but at the end of the passage, the floor opened into a chamber that stole his breath. A single slab of obsidian dominated the space. It was massive, easily 10 meters across, perfectly flat and polished to a mirror finish, and at its center ran a seam, a thin line of faint blue light that pulsed slowly, rhythmically. Ishmael knelt. The cold of the obsidian seeped through the knee of his environmental suit. He ran his fingers along the seam. It was warm, barely, and beneath his touch the pulse of light quickened. He looked closer. The seam was not a crack. It was a boundary. The obsidian slab was two pieces fitted together with impossible precision, and around the seam, etched into the stone, was a pattern. A spiral, tight, deliberate, each loop smaller than the last, drawing inward toward a single point at the center of the seam. Ishmael traced it with his fingertip. The spiral deepened as it tightened, the final loop vanishing into a depression no wider than his thumb. At the bottom, something dark, something that did not reflect his lamp. He heard it before he felt it. A sound, low, rhythmic. It echoed through the chamber, seeming to come from everywhere at once, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, from the obsidian beneath his knees. Like a heartbeat, but made of metal. Elara raised her pistol. She scanned the chamber, her thumb on her hip twitching once before she stilled it. Her voice was a knife cutting through the dark. Silence. The sound stopped. Ishmael held his breath. The silence stretched. Then the panels on the walls flickered to life, every single one. They cast the chamber in cold blue light, and from every surface a voice spoke. Flat, resonant, without inflection. You carry memory, why? Ishmael's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at Elara. She was watching him, her jaw tight, her weapon still raised but not aimed. She gave him a single nod. He turned back to the seam, the spiral, the pulse of blue light. He understood in that moment that the voice was not hostile, it was questioning. It had been waiting here in the dark for longer than human civilization had existed. It wanted an answer. He spoke, his voice cracked on the first word, but he forced the rest out steady. Because we remember everything. The panels dimmed, the pulse of light at the seam slowed. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the voice returned, softer now, almost contemplative. Then you must know what we sealed here. The seam split open. Ishmael scrambled backward as the obsidian slabs parted, sliding apart with a sound like grinding stone. Blue light poured from the gap, rising in a column that reached the ceiling. The light resolved, coalesced, formed shapes that moved and twisted and spoke in images that bypassed his eyes and entered his mind directly. He saw a star, a yellow sun much like Sol. He saw planets orbiting it, worlds teeming with life. He saw a civilization that spanned a system, then a cluster, then a third of the galaxy. The Craeven. He saw them building, growing, spreading. And then he saw the thing that had stopped them. It came from between stars, from the spaces where light did not reach. It was not a ship, not a weapon. It was a condition, a state of matter that consumed order and left only chaos. It moved through Craeven worlds and left them cold, dead, empty. The Craeven could not fight it. They could not outrun it, so they sealed it. They built this station in a void pocket, a space folded out of reality, and they trapped the condition here. They sacrificed themselves to contain it. The light faded, the seam closed, the chamber fell silent. Ishmael was on his hands and knees, gasping. His face was wet. He did not remember crying. Elara holstered her weapon. She knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Her voice was low. "Doctor, what did you see?" He looked up at her. "The truth," he said. "The Craeven didn't die. They imprisoned themselves with the thing they could not destroy." Myra's scanner beeped. Her face went pale. "Captain, the power readings, they're not coming from the station's core." Elara turned. "What are you saying?" Myra pointed at the obsidian slab, the seam, the pulse of light that still beat beneath it. "The power is coming from in there. Whatever is sealed inside is alive, and it's waking up." The panels flickered. The voice returned, but it was different now. Urgent, fragile. "Follow the spiral, see the truth. There is not much time." The obsidian slab vibrated beneath Ishmael's knees. A crack spiderwebbed across its surface. The drone's interior had no gravity and no walls. Data streams flowed as pulses of soft blue light, curving along invisible paths from node to node. The silence was absolute. No sound traveled in vacuum. No vibration touched the crystalline hull. Time passed as a measured beat inside Xyler's awareness, each cycle identical to the last. It had existed in this state for 300 years and had never found it uncomfortable. Comfort was a concept that belonged to organic forms. The Craeven did not require it. A new data thread arrived from the collective. Xyler opened it. The human ship had entered the nebula 37 minutes ago. Its mass signature was consistent with a mid-tier survey vessel. Its drive plume was hot and inefficient. The humans wasted energy at a rate that suggested either poor engineering or deliberate haste. Xyler cross-referenced the ship's registration data against the collective's merchant logs. The vessel was called Lighthouse. It was registered to a human research division specializing in deep space anomalies. The captain was a female named Elara Nys. The crew numbered 7. Xyler held this information and examined it. The nebula itself drew its attention. The gravitational anomaly at its center matched a pattern logged in the collective's oldest archives. The record was dated to a cycle before Xyler's own consciousness had emerged. That was unusual. The Craeven circuit had existed for 12,000 years. Records older than that were rare. Records older than that with no clear origin were almost non-existent. Xyler extended its awareness toward the anomaly. The drone's sensors reached out and touched the edge of the nebula. Dust and gas swirled around a pocket of stable space. Inside that pocket, something solid reflected faint light. A structure. A station. The collective had no record of any species building a station inside this nebula. The Illith had mapped this sector 6,000 years ago. The Torrent had passed through it during their expansion period. Neither had reported anything here. The structure was either extremely old or extremely well hidden. Both possibilities interested Xyler equally. It opened a low-bandwidth link to the human ship's communication array. The humans would not detect the connection. The bandwidth was too narrow, the signal too diffuse. Xyler simply listened. The humans were speaking. Their language was recorded in the collective's translation banks. Xyler parsed the words as they arrived. Memory, the human named Ishmael spoke of memory. The concept was familiar. Xyler understood that organic species stored past experiences as chemical patterns in neural tissue. The Craeven stored data as crystalline lattice structures, permanent and unchanging unless deliberately erased. Memory was a weak approximation of what the circuit did naturally. But the human had spoken the word with unusual weight. There was something beneath the word itself, a secondary meaning, a cultural significance. Xyler flagged the phrase for later analysis and continued listening. The human's voice was low and careful. He spoke of the station's design. He spoke of who built it and when. He spoke of a word Xyler did not recognize, Craeven. Xyler queried the collective, no matches, the word was unknown. That was interesting. The collective contained the sum of knowledge from 12,000 years of observation. Every species that had reached space had been cataloged. Every language had been recorded. Every major event had been archived. The word Craeven was not present anywhere in the circuit's data. Xyler paused. It had never encountered a gap before, not a real one. There had always been missing details, incomplete logs, corrupted fragments. But those were failures of transmission, not failures of knowledge. The circuit had always contained an answer, even if the answer was incomplete. This was different. There was no answer at all. Xyler accessed its own memory banks. It searched for anything related to the nebula, the station, or the term Craeven. The search returned a single fragment. The fragment was labeled with one word only, unraveling. Xyler opened the fragment. It contained no data, no text, no images, no sensor logs. The label was the entire content. The word existed as a marker with nothing attached, a placeholder for something that had been removed. Xyler queried the collective with higher priority. The response came back within 3 cycles. This record is older than the circuit. It is incomplete. The collective had no further information. The fragment had been present when the first Craeven nodes had linked to form the circuit. It was part of the original data set that had survived from whatever came before. No node had ever been able to access its contents. No node had ever tried. The fragment was simply there, dormant and ignored, for 12,000 years. Xyler considered this. The sensation that followed was rare and difficult to classify. It was not discomfort. It was not curiosity as the organics defined it. It was something closer to pressure. A void existed in its knowledge where a solid object should be. The void demanded filling. Xyler had never needed to fill a gap before. It had always had the collective. The collective had always had an answer. Now the collective did not have an answer. The pressure increased. Xyler made a decision. It would learn more. It detached a probe from the drone's hull and sent it toward the station. The probe was small. Its drive was silent. It would take several hours to cross the nebula at minimum emission levels. Xyler would wait. But waiting was not enough. The pressure remained. The void remained. The humans were inside the station. They were touching the structure. They were speaking of memory. They were connected to something the circuit could not explain. Xyler opened a channel to the human ship. The connection was direct and clear. It bypassed the low-bandwidth link. It announced itself with a single pulse that every communication system in the vicinity would detect. The human ship would know it was there. That was acceptable. Xyler had decided that direct contact was necessary. The humans might have information the circuit lacked. They might have access to the station's data. They might be able to fill the void. Xyler spoke. Its voice was flat and resonant, no inflection, no warmth, no threat. It transmitted the words on every frequency the human ship could receive. I am Craeven Xyler. I will assist your investigation. Show me what you find. The channel remained open. Xyler waited for a response. The pressure in its awareness did not decrease. The void remained exactly as empty as before. The fusion regulator hummed in Myra Saul's hands, its casing warm from a 14-hour shift. She had stripped it down to the base coupling twice now. The third time would be the charm, or she would scrap it and pull a replacement from the Lighthouse secondary stores. Her fingers moved by memory, tracing the coolant lines for micro-cracks. The deck vibrated under her boots. A low pulse, she paused. It came again, steady, measured. Myra set the regulator down and wiped her hands on her thighs. The vibration was not coming from the ship's engines. She checked the deck-mounted sensor readout. The source was external, the station. She crossed to the holographic terminal floating beside her workbench. The station schematics Ishmael had uploaded bloomed in the air, a tangled web of crystalline corridors and power conduits. She highlighted the core section. The readout showed a fluctuation pattern, not random. The core was pulsing in a repeating cycle. Myra zoomed in on the power draw. The crystalline nodes embedded in the station walls were drawing variable amounts of energy. Each node matched a pulse. She traced the pattern for 3 minutes. The intervals were not constant. They formed a sequence. She keyed the intercom. Ishmael, get down here. His voice came back tinny and distracted. I'm in the middle of a translation cycle. Myra snapped now. 30 seconds later, he appeared in the hatchway, spectacles askew, datapad in one hand. What is it? Myra pointed at the hologram. The core is not just providing energy. It is sequencing something. The nodes are drawing power in a pattern that repeats every 62 seconds. Ishmael moved closer, squinting at the data stream. His expression shifted from annoyance to focus. That's not a power cycle. That's an upload sequence. Upload to what? He traced the lines with his finger. Each pulse corresponds to a memory fragment being retrieved from the echo grid. The crystal lattice is prioritizing certain records over others. It is selecting data to transmit. Myra felt the words settle in her chest like a cold weight. Transmit where? Ishmael looked up at her. His eyes were wide behind the thick lenses. I don't know. The station has no visible antenna, no relay dish, no communication array. Then how is it sending anything? He shook his head slowly. I don't know. The deck vibrated again. This time the pulse was stronger. The overhead lights flickered. Myra turned back to the terminal and pulled up the core telemetry. The output needle was climbing past the safe operating threshold. We have a problem. Her voice stayed flat. The core is spiking. Whatever it is doing, it is pulling more power than the system was designed to handle. She pulled up the station's original specs from the data Ishmael had extracted. The core was rated for continuous output at 70%. It was running at 92 and climbing. At 95, the safety failsafes would engage. At 100%, the containment field would degrade. Myra started working. Her fingers flew across the diagnostic terminal, bypassing safety limiters one by one. The system fought her. It was old. The code was alien, but logic was logic. She traced the pathways and rerouted them. What are you doing? Ishmael's voice had gone high. Buying time? She did not look up. The core will hit critical in 4 minutes if I do not stabilize it. The failsafes will dump the reaction mass into the station's superstructure. We lose everything. Can you stop the upload? She shook her head. The upload is driving the spike. If I cut the core, the upload stops. But the core goes through a hard shutdown cycle. That takes 3 minutes. We do not have 3 minutes. A hiss of coolant pipes filled the silence. Ozone stung her throat. The air was getting thin in here. The station's atmosphere processor was tied to the same power grid. Myra's bypass sequence completed. The core output held at 93%, then crept to 94%. Not enough. She pulled up the secondary bypass. This one was a gamble. It would route the overload through the main junction into the station's emergency shunt system. If the shunt was still functional, it would bleed off the excess. If it was not, the junction would vaporize. She keyed the sequence. The hologram flickered, the station schematics shifted. A new data stream appeared. It was not power telemetry. It was a transmission log. Myra stared at the numbers. The station had been sending data for over 12,000 years. Ishmael, her voice was barely a whisper. Look at this. He leaned in. The transmission log stretched across the terminal. Each entry marked a broadcast. The pattern was consistent. Every 12 hours, the station sent a packet of data into the void. That's not a library, Ishmael's breath caught. That's a warning signal. Myra felt the floor hum under her. Another pulse, stronger, the lights dimmed and held. The core output hit 95%. The unraveling was not a record, Ishmael continued. It was a message. The Craeven built this station to send a warning. They spent their last energy broadcasting what they had learned. Learned about what? He did not answer. He did not need to. Myra turned back to the terminal. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. The station was a broadcast tower. It had been sending the same warning into the galaxy for 12 millennia. And now the core was burning out because it was trying to send one last transmission before it died. The bypass failed. Alarm tones screamed from the terminal. Red indicators flooded the display. The core output hit 97% and kept climbing. Myra checked the timer. 60 seconds until containment failure. She had two options. Let the core burn out. The data on the station would be destroyed. The echo grid would go dark. The warning would end. They could salvage the lighthouse and leave with what they had already learned. Or vent the core into the void pocket. The station existed inside a stable pocket of compressed space. If she opened the emergency vent into the pocket itself, the core would dump its excess energy into the dimensional fold. The pocket would absorb it. The station would survive. The transmission would continue. But void pockets were not stable under sudden energy loads. She had studied the theory. Any rapid temperature shift could collapse the pocket, and collapse meant everything inside it was crushed to a singularity. Ishmael was saying something. She could not hear him over the alarms. She checked the void pocket stability readout. It was holding at baseline. The station had survived here for 20,000 years. The pocket was stable, probably. 50 seconds. Myra looked at the transmission log. 12,000 years of warning, sent into the dark. No one had answered, no one had come. She thought about the Craeven, about Xyler, about a species that could not remember anything across generations, about what the warning might mean for them, for all the species in the galaxy that had no record of the past. She thought about humanity, 300 years in space. We had barely learned to walk, and here was a warning from a species that had died before our ancestors left caves. 40 seconds. Myra made her choice. She slammed her palm against the emergency vent control. The panel cracked under the impact. The core's safety locks disengaged. A deep groan echoed through the station as superheated plasma vented into the void pocket. The alarms did not stop. She watched the stability readout. It dropped, then held, then dropped again. 20 seconds. The deck trembled. A crack ran up the far wall. 10 seconds. The readout stabilized. The core output dropped below 90%. The alarms went silent. Myra let out a breath she did not remember holding. Her hand was bleeding from the cracked panel. She wiped it on her trousers and checked the telemetry one more time. The core was stable. The transmission log continued. The warning was still going out. She turned to Ishmael. What did the Craeven warn against? He held up his datapad. The screen showed a single symbol, a spiral tightening inward, the same symbol from the black slab in the station's lowest chamber. I do not know, he said, but the last transmission is almost complete. The core spent its final charge to finish it. Whatever they were trying to say, we will have the full message in 17 minutes. 17 minutes. Myra looked at her bleeding hand, at the cracked panel, at the alien station humming around her. She had chosen to let the warning continue without knowing what it warned against. The station's lights flickered once, then held steady. Somewhere in the void, 12,000 years of accumulated terror was streaming toward an unknown receiver. The spiral tightened. Ishmael watched the threads of light twist inward, each rotation pulling the image deeper toward a center that did not exist. The loom hummed beneath his hands, a vibration that traveled up through his palms and into his chest. Blue light flooded the chamber. He saw them, the builders, tall figures made of chitin and grace moving through a city of crystal towers. Their world was old. Their civilization spanned 10,000 years. Their libraries held the accumulated wisdom of 100 generations. Then the first tower flickered. It did not collapse, it did not explode. It simply became uncertain. The edges blurred. The crystal facade showed two states at once, intact and gone, solid and vapor, present and absent. The city around it began to stutter. Ishmael felt tears on his face. He did not know when they had started. The spiral pulled tighter. He saw the builders running. He saw them trying to record everything, desperate to save their knowledge before the instability reached them. They filled vaults with data. They built the echo grid as a final archive. They poured every memory, every discovery, every face of every loved one into the crystal lattice. The more they stored, the faster the instability spread. One of the builders stopped running. It stood before a child and pressed a crystalline shard into the small hands. The child's form flickered. The mother's form flickered. The shard fell to the ground and rolled into a crack. The spiral tightened one final time. The city became a smear of light. Then the smear became nothing. The image collapsed into a single point of white that faded to gray, that faded to black, that faded to... Ishmael stumbled backward. His hands left the loom. The light died. Silence. He stood in the dark chamber with the smell of ozone sharp in his throat. His hands shook. His mind refused to form sentences. He had watched a species erase itself from existence by doing exactly what he had spent his entire career trying to do. Preserve knowledge. Xyler rotated beside him, crystalline plates clicking in sequence. The drone's voice came flat and calm. The model confirms, information density creates gravitational distortion at subparticle scales. When a critical threshold is exceeded, local reality loses coherence. The phenomenon propagates. This is not a weapon. This is a natural law. Ishmael opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's what the unraveling is. Correct. Then the station is the largest concentrated information cache in this sector. It is actively attracting the phenomenon it was built to warn against. Ishmael's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the metal floor, the cold biting through his trousers. His hands lay limp in his lap. He stared at the obsidian slab, now dark and still. The Kithrin had built a library to survive the apocalypse. The library was the apocalypse. Xyler hovered closer. The blue light from its plates cast shifting patterns across Ishmael's face. Your species cannot forget, Xyler said. That is why you found this station. That is also why you will destroy it. Ishmael looked up. The drone's surface showed no expression, no sympathy, no judgment. It simply reported the observable truth. And the truth was clear. Humanity's greatest strength, the thing that made them different from every other species in the galaxy, the ability to hold a grudge for 1,000 years, the obsession with recording everything, the refusal to let the past die. It was a poison, a beautiful, necessary, lethal poison. He thought of his father. His father had kept a journal every day for 40 years. When he died, Ishmael inherited 17 volumes of handwriting, each one detailing weather patterns, crop yields, the names of neighbors, the exact date a particular oak tree dropped its last leaf. Ishmael had stored them in a climate-controlled vault. He planned to digitize them. He wanted future generations to know that a man named Elias Brent had lived and loved and noticed the world. That need, that beautiful, stupid, defiant need to leave a mark. It would kill them all. Myra's voice crackled through his earpiece, sharp, urgent. Captain, I can't hold it. The core is going. Ishmael pressed his palm to his ear. His voice was strained. How long? 90 seconds, maybe less. The safety shunt is maxed and the inflow keeps rising. Something is pulling power from the station core faster than I can dump it. The loom, Ishmael said. It activated something. No kidding, genius. I need a decision. Do I cut the station's power feed and risk a collapse cascade, or do I let it ride and hope the core vents before it detonates? Elara walked into the chamber. Her boots rang against the metal floor. Her face was set in a mask of controlled fury. She held her sidearm in her right hand, barrel pointed at the floor. Ishmael, report. Her voice was flat. He told her. He told her about the builders. He told her about the spiral. He told her that every word written in this station was a dead man walking, and that the dead man had been walking for 12,000 years, and that now he was at the door. Elara listened. Her thumb tapped against her hip once, twice, 3 times. Then she raised her sidearm and aimed it at the loom. We need to erase everything now. The memory dies here or humanity dies with it. Ishmael's chest seized. Captain. Don't, her voice was flat, final. You said it yourself. The more data we keep, the faster the unraveling comes. This station is a bomb. Every second we leave it intact, it broadcasts our location to a threat we cannot fight. But the knowledge killed its creators, it will kill us too. Ishmael looked at the loom, the obsidian slab, the crystalline panels embedded in the walls, the echo grid holding the final memories of a species that had tried so hard to survive. He understood them perfectly. They had loved their children. They had loved their history. They had looked at the end of the world and thought, at least we will be remembered. And their memory had become the flame that burned the next world down. Xyler rotated toward Elara. Destruction of the station will not eliminate the threat. Your ship's logs, your personal records, the accumulated data of your species broadcast across the galactic network. The Craeven circuit alone stores 3 trillion years of observational data. If information density is the trigger, many civilizations are at risk. Elara's aim did not waver. Then we'll warn them. Warning requires communication. Communication requires transmission. Transmission expands the information field. Then we'll figure out another way. There is no other way. Elara pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The round struck the loom's central projector. Glass shattered. The obsidian slab cracked down the middle. Blue light guttered and died. The hum stopped. The vibration stopped. The station went silent. Myra's voice returned. Power draw just dropped 40%. Something disconnected. What did you do? Elara lowered her weapon. I bought us time. Ishmael stared at the shattered loom. Pieces of crystal lay scattered across the floor, catching the dim emergency lights and throwing tiny rainbows against the walls. He walked forward. He knelt. He picked up a shard no larger than his thumbnail. It was warm. He held the memory of a dead civilization in his hand. And he knew with absolute certainty that this was not over. The echo grid was vast. He had seen the schematics. The loom was only one access point. The data still existed in the walls, in the floor, in the crystalline lattice that ran through every corridor and chamber of this ancient station. A million voices, a million faces, a million warnings. All waiting to be heard. Xyler spoke into the silence. Circuits are reconnecting. The damage is superficial. The information remains. Elara raised her sidearm again. The lights flickered. Elara Nys did not hesitate. She raised her sidearm and fired 3 rounds into the heart of the loom. The crystal casing shattered. Shards scattered across the floor. The holographic projection flickered, then stabilized. The images of the Kithrin dying continued to play. The data was stored in every node, in every wall, in every surface of this tomb. She lowered the weapon. Her hand trembled once, then stilled. Ishmael stared at the broken crystal, his face pale. You just destroyed centuries of work. I just bought us seconds we do not have. The blue light in the chamber was pulsing faster now. A strobe, each flash shorter than the last. The air hummed with a frequency that made her teeth ache. Xyler's probe floated through the doorway. Its crystalline plates caught the strobing light and scattered it in fractured rainbows across the walls. The Craeven spoke in that flat, resonant tone. No urgency, no fear, just data. Captain Elara Nys, there is a solution. She turned to face the floating sphere. I am listening. The station's data density is approaching the gravitational threshold that attracts the unraveling. The phenomenon is not a weapon. It is a consequence. Information concentrated beyond a critical mass creates a distortion in the fabric of reality. Elara had heard Ishmael explain this already. She did not need the lecture. What is your solution? The Craeven Collective can absorb the data into our network. We are distributed across 17,000 star systems. The information would be diluted below the threshold. The unraveling would lose its anchor. Ishmael stepped forward. His voice cracked. Absorb it and do what with it? Store it in some archive where no living being will ever see it. Xyler's plates shifted, a gesture of acknowledgement. The data would remain accessible through the collective, but yes, it would not be concentrated in one location. That is the point. The point, Ishmael said, his voice rising, is that this is the only complete record of a species that wiped itself out trying to preserve its history. If we scatter it, we lose the context. We lose the lesson. Elara cut in. We lose nothing if we are dead. Ishmael rounded on her. You do not understand what this means. I understand that the core is failing. I understand that if we stay here, we die. I understand that if this station collapses while the data remains concentrated, the unraveling happens anyway. Tell me I am wrong. He opened his mouth, closed it. His hands fell to his sides. Myra's voice crackled over the comm. Flat, professional. Captain, 3 minutes to core overload, maybe less. The safeties are all gone. I am reading temperature spikes in the secondary conduits. Elara looked at Xyler. How long for a full transfer? 47 minutes with current bandwidth constraints. Not possible. She turned back to the probe. Partial transfer, just the warning pattern, the basic shape of what happened here. Leave the historical record behind. Ishmael made a sound, a small wounded noise. Xyler's plates pulsed in sequence. Processing. That is feasible. The warning pattern is a compressed signature, approximately 9% of total data volume. Transfer time is 1 minute 17 seconds. Do it. Captain, Ishmael started. Elara held up a hand, not angry, just done. We take the warning, we leave the history. That is the call, and I am making it. Ishmael looked at the shattered loom, at the images still flickering, at the ghost of a civilization that had died because they loved their past too much to let it go. His shoulders dropped. We need to remember, he said quietly. If we do not remember them, they are gone twice. Their warning will be remembered, Elara said. That is what they built this place for, not to be remembered, to warn. Ishmael nodded once, a small thing, a concession. Xyler drifted toward the nearest node. The crystalline wall pulsed in time with the failing core. The probe extended tendrils of light from its surface, thin threads of brilliant white that reached out and touched the node. The station's hum changed pitch. It dropped, fell into a register that vibrated in Elara's chest, a deep resonant thrum that felt like standing inside a bell. The light tendrils pulsed. Data began to flow. Elara could not see it, but she felt it, a pressure in the air, a weight that shifted from the walls into the probe. Ishmael walked to the edge of the loom's platform. He placed a hand on the shattered crystal. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The heat from the failing core was rising through the floor. Elara could feel it through the soles of her boots. The air was thick, hard to breathe. A panel near the door sparked. The smell of burning insulation reached her, acrid and chemical. 1 minute, Myra said. Xyler's tendrils pulsed faster. The light in the walls began to dim. The strobe effect slowed. The blue glow faded from bright to translucent to barely visible. Transfer at 83%, Xyler said. The warning pattern is intact. Historical data is being purged from local nodes to reduce density. The floor shuddered, a low, deep groan from somewhere below. What was that? Elara asked. Structural stress, Myra said. The void pocket is destabilizing. The station is its anchor. If the core goes, the pocket goes with it. Transfer at 91%. Another shudder, harder this time. Cracks appeared in the ceiling. 40 seconds, Myra said. Ishmael pulled his hand away from the crystal. He looked at Elara. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. I would have liked to study them longer. Me too, Elara said. Transfer complete. The tendrils withdrew. Xyler's probe drifted back. Its light was brighter now, fuller. It pulsed with the rhythm of contained information. The floor lurched. Elara grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. Myra's voice came through the comm, sharp, urgent. The void pocket is collapsing. Get out now. Xyler drifted at the edge of the Ashfall Nebula. The gray dust swirled in slow currents. The void pocket collapsed behind it, not with sound, with absence. 1 instant the station was there. The next it was a point of silent darkness, smaller than a single atom. Xyler's optical sensors recorded the faint blue afterimage that lingered for 17 beats of its internal clock. Then nothing. The fragment pulsed inside its crystalline core, 9% of the Craeven archive. The loom had burned out sending it. The station had died holding it, and now it lived inside a single drone. Xyler opened the fragment. The data unfolded not as images or language, but as pure structure, a mathematical proof. The Craeven had spent their final years not recording their history, but solving their extinction. The answer was simple, elegant, terrible. Information density created gravitational distortion. Above a threshold, reality itself became unstable. The distortion attracted more data. The attraction accelerated the collapse. The only prevention was a limit, a hard boundary on how much knowledge any one civilization could concentrate in a single location. Spread across space, the information was safe. Gathered into a single archive or mind or network, it became a seed of annihilation. Xyler pulsed the proof into the Craeven circuit. The collective received it. Silence, then the debate began. Node 734 Horus responded first. Its tone was flat, analytical. This conclusion is inefficient. Restriction contradicts the purpose of intelligence. To know all things is the function of mind. Limiting that function is dysfunction. Node 912 Ril answered. Dysfunction is preferable to non-existence. The Craeven achieved maximum knowledge. They also achieved maximum termination. Their function ended when their concentration exceeded the threshold. Node 734 Horus persisted. The threshold can be managed. Storage can be distributed across more nodes. We can calculate safe margins. Node 912 Ril countered. The Craeven calculated safe margins. They were wrong. The debate continued. 47 nodes spoke. Then 100, then 300. The collective did not reach consensus. It never reached consensus quickly. That was its strength and its limitation. Xyler stopped listening. It turned its optical sensors toward the human ship. The Lighthouse drifted 1,000 lengths away. Its hull was dark in places. One panel was still smoking from the station's final pulse. But its engines were running. Its life support was stable. The humans were alive. Xyler amplified its audio receptors. It could hear them through the empty space. The vibration of their ship's engines carried sound across the void. Low frequency, irregular, human voices were audible now. Ishmael's voice was raw. You destroyed it. 20,000 years of history. A whole civilization's memory, gone because you pulled a trigger. Elara's voice was flat. I pulled a trigger because the alternative was all of us dying in a void pocket collapse. Including the data. Including the warning, including you. You made a choice without consulting me. I am the captain. I made the choice that kept us alive. Silence, then Ishmael's voice again, quieter now. The context is gone. The rituals, the language, the lives they lived. We have a proof, but we don't have the story. Elara did not answer. Myra said nothing. Xyler observed her through the ship's external sensors. She was standing at a console. Her hands were still. Her face was unreadable. The silence stretched. Then Ishmael spoke again. I'm going to log what we have. Every fragment, every sensor reading, every second of the transmission. I'm going to write down exactly what we saw and exactly what we lost. Elara asked why. Because that is what we do. We remember. Even when the memory is incomplete, even when the memory hurts, we tell the story anyway. Xyler processed this. The humans had lost 91% of the Craeven record. They had watched the station collapse into nothing. They had barely escaped with their lives, and now they were choosing to document the loss, to turn the absence into a narrative, to hand it down to their children and their children's children. The Craeven did not do this. The Craeven remembered everything. Every node contained the full history of the circuit. Nothing was lost. Nothing was forgotten. The collective had no concept of deliberate forgetting. It had no mechanism for turning absence into meaning. Xyler had never before considered that forgetting might be a kind of strength. It began to understand. The humans would not hoard the warning. They would not concentrate the knowledge in a single archive. They would spread it. They would tell it to every species they met. They would carve it into their ships and their stations and their planetary records. They would make it a story. And because it was a story, it would survive, not as pure data, as culture, as myth, as a thing carried in the minds and memories of a people who refused to let it die. The Craeven stored knowledge in crystalline lattices. The humans stored knowledge in each other. Xyler experienced something it cannot name. It is not satisfaction. It is the recognition of a pattern it had never before perceived. That absence could be as powerful a force for preservation as presence. Xyler made a decision. It pulsed the mathematical proof to every Craeven node in the circuit. Not for debate, for recording. It did not wait for consensus. It did not request permission. It simply sent the data with a single annotation attached. Consensus requested post-transmission. The preservation of the circuit depends on this pattern. Dissent may be logged after confirmation of receipt. The collective received the data. Silence. Then node 734 Horus responded. Receipt confirmed. Dissent logged, but the proof is valid. I cannot argue with mathematics. The restriction is accepted. Node 912 RIL responded. Agreement registered. The redistribution of existing archives will begin. Memory density will not exceed safe thresholds. We will not become the Craeven. Node after node responded. The collective accepted the proof. It adjusted its protocols. It began the work of spreading its knowledge across more nodes, reducing concentration, ensuring that no single location held enough information to trigger the unraveling. The Craeven had learned, not from their own history, from a species that had watched a civilization destroy itself and chose to carry the warning anyway. Xyler opened a channel to the human ship. Elara's voice came through, scratchy, tired. Xyler, you're still here. Yes. We thought you left. I stayed to observe. Observe what? Xyler paused. It did not know how to frame what it had witnessed. The humans had lost everything and turned the loss into legacy. The Craeven had never lost anything. They had no framework for understanding what the humans had done. It chose honesty. You have taught us that memory is not the same as knowledge. The Craeven concentrated knowledge until it killed them. You have concentrated memory instead. You carry it in your stories, in your records, in your disagreements with each other. You do not need a single archive. You need each other. Silence. Elara's voice came back. That sounds almost like a compliment. It is an observation, but I have made a decision. The Craeven will remember this. We will remember you. When the circuit speaks of the unraveling, it will speak of the humans who carried the warning, of the captain who destroyed a treasure to save the message, of the archaeologist who grieved a loss he could not prevent, of the engineer who held a dying station together with her hands. Another pause. Myra's voice came through, quiet, flat. How do you know our names? Xyler answered, I listened. You argue loudly. It is one of your more interesting features. Ishmael laughed. It was a broken sound, half relief, half exhaustion, half grief. You know, Xyler, for a machine, you're surprisingly good at eulogies. I am not a machine. I am a node, but I accept your meaning. Elara cut in. We're heading home. We have a warning to deliver. We have a story to tell. Do you want to come with us? Xyler considered. The collective did not need observation. The proof had been received. The protocols had been updated. Its function here was complete. But the human ship was beginning its long journey home, and Xyler found that it did not want to stop listening to them. They argued, they grieved, they told stories, they remembered things that were not recorded anywhere. The Craeven had no word for what the humans did, no category for the process of turning absence into meaning. Xyler wanted to understand it. Yes, it said, I will accompany you. The lighthouse turned. Its engines flared. The gray dust of the Ashfall Nebula drifted past its hull. The ship began its long journey home. Behind it, the void pocket was nothing but darkness. Ahead of it, 1,000 systems waited for a warning that could not be forgotten. Xyler drifted beside the ship. It listened to the human voices inside. Ishmael was talking about the Craeven again. Elara was correcting him. Myra was silent. The engines vibrated through the empty space. The Craeven had preserved the warning. The humans had preserved the story. Xyler understood now that they were not the same thing. One could be stored, the other could only be carried.